All right, thank you guys for being here. I apologize in advance for my voice. Hopefully it will last the entire time of the meeting, but been dealing with a little sinus infection past few days and been talking on the phone a lot today. So it's we'll see. Hopefully I can make it. And hopefully you guys can hear me clearly. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about bidding and budgeting on renovation projects. We're going to be talking about how I break down my cost as an investor, the way I kind of view it, and then obviously on the general contracting side as well. Talk a little bit about how to manage those relationships as an investor with contractors and with general contractors or project managers. And then just a little bit of some of the systems that I use to help keep things organized. By no means is my system perfect, but it's gotten better over the last 7 years of doing it, and hopefully it will be helpful for you guys as well. So the first thing I'm going to pull up here, especially since I know we actually talked a little bit about this at the end of our call last time, where you guys see that should be a spreadsheet. Okay. So this is the budget spreadsheet for the project that we did the case study on 2 weeks ago. So this is the same duplex in Norwood. And I thought that would probably be the most helpful one to work off of. So if you scroll down to the bottom here, this is the total approved budget. So this is a spreadsheet that I use to submit my estimated cost and budget to the bank. So if you're doing a commercial or hard money loan, they're going to want to see something like this. I think Park National is the one who gave me this template many years ago, but I've used this same template with multiple banks, and they all, are kind of fine with it. They all might have their own little different template, but they all basically accomplish the same thing, right? So the idea on here is to come up with line item cost, depending on what your project's going to be. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory. And as you go through your project in phases, you're going to get draws. So these first, second, third, all this, these are the draws that are being reimbursed to me from the bank. So 46, 40, 38. Okay. And then on each of these, you pay an inspection and draw fee to get your money back. So how I come up with these numbers. And this is obviously going to be different depending on your type of project, who you're working with, if you're doing work yourself, if you're hiring things out, so this is going to be very situational. But for me, I look at my scope of work. So let's take an individual task, right? Like demo. So this is actually a little bit different. So for demo, because I use a sub crew, which is now probably more similar to what everyone watching this would do, I'm going to have my sub crew come through, ideally during my due diligence phase of a project, meaning before I close on it, and have them give me a rough number. Now, I'm not expecting this number here to be exact, but if I'm budgeting 6,000, then I want to make sure it's not 12,000, right? So I'm going to ask them to give me a relatively ballpark number on a demo. Now for framing, since that's something that I would handle in-house with my guys and my employees, that's something I would price out my estimated labor time. So for me, I take my guy's hourly rate, who am I assigning the project to, and depending on the task, that's going to be different people. And I'm going to figure how many hours are estimated. So let's just say framing here, for example, working backwards from my number there, I can kind of give you guys an idea of how many man hours I am projecting for that. And here's another little tip. So I know none of you have full-time or part-time employees right now, but let's just say at some point in your life or business, you do get to that. I always look at my worst case cost. So I look at my most expensive employees' hourly rate, and I base my projected cost on that. Because then if it comes in lower for me or my customer, no one's ever going to complain about saving money, right? But if I think I'm going to send, these two guys at 25 bucks an hour, and I end up having to send my other guy at 35 bucks an hour, obviously that's going to throw off my number substantially, especially if you're talking about, a multiple week project, right? So That's just another little tip. It may not apply for most of you, but something to think about. Okay. So the way I have this figured based on the $6,500 allocation for framing, that would be 110 man hours for 2 guys. Okay. Now, obviously, if you break that out, let's say you had 4 guys, then you're only going to have, 55 man hours per guy, right? Based on that cost. So that would be like, 7 days of framing with 4 guys, if that makes sense. So one thing I'll tell you when we get, I'm just trying to give you guys some examples here to work off of. One thing I can tell you is that this was significantly underbid. So almost all of these items you're looking at are low. But this is just, what I had from 2 years ago or whatever when I first bought the building. Other things to keep in mind with like a budget like this was right when COVID hit, lockdowns. And I know I talked about this I talked about this 2 weeks ago, but it's like, the price of OSB, let's look at my lumber cost here. I have $4,000 on lumber. Well, this tripled in like a 3-month span, right? So from the time I put a contract on it until I closed, until I started actually buying material, that number right there tripled. And obviously none of us anticipated that. If anybody was buying lumber the last, 2 months or 24 months or so, you know what I'm talking about. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I wanted you guys to have an idea of what banks are going to be looking for, what I use. But it's really, the less you know, the more tedious and time consuming this is going to be. But this is literally how I look at projects, right? I literally spend the time and I go through how many man hours is this going to be? And even if you don't own a construction company, this is a good thing to do, because if you're coming up with, let's say $30 a man hour, that's probably like that's a higher end average for a skilled laborer. Okay. And you're looking at this and you're like, maybe you got a little bit of construction experience and you're like, hey, I could frame this out. I could frame out the scope of these 2 apartments or whatever in 2 weeks by myself or with a helper. And then they come back to you with a $20,000 framing line. Something's not adding up, right? They're either thinking it's going to take twice as long as it should, or they're charging you twice as much as they should. One of the two, right? And then maybe you have to have that conversation to, say, hey, I'm just confused on this number. Or maybe you got a couple bids and you have 2 at 12,000 and 1 at 20,000. Hey, this is a little out of line with what the other bids I'm looking at. What is it that, what are you looking at to come up with this number? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Try to get some explanation. And if they can't give you an explanation, then they're just throwing numbers against the wall to see what sticks and trying to get as much money out of you as possible. And that's, I see that happen many, many times. So, Todd?
Sorry, my bad. 2 quick questions, Joe, for you. On your draw fee and the percentage, what do you get hit with on that typically, or does it depend on the amount?
I was recently told they went up quite a bit. I think the last quote I got was like $350 or $400 per draw. Well, I mean, when I started, they were like $150. I mean, so they've like all those have almost tripled in price as well from the last term sheet I got.
Gotcha. And then once you submit this to the bank, how granular do they get on looking at your numbers? Do you ever get called out on like, hey, we're looking at your budget for HVAC. We think you're low by $5,000, or how? Just curious about
You
that.
mean when I'm actually submitting these on the front end?
Yeah.
No, not for me. And I think part of the reason why I probably get more leeway than a lot of borrowers would is because I'm actually GCing the project and my company is. So like, I think they kind of take me at my word of like, hey, this is what he's saying he's going to pay. So, you know what I mean? I think if you are subbing everything out to like a project manager or GC, then your bank may, be a little bit scrutinize it a little bit more.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
But honestly, the fact that I don't get much pushback is kind of came back to bite me in the ass a few times because of the situations like this, right? Again, this is kind of a bad example because this was literally prime COVID. Like no one anticipated this. Like I don't, unless you had a crystal ball, no one could have anticipated this budget getting blown up the way it did. Gotcha. But some pushback sometimes is not a bad thing because banks don't want to lose money. So they generally know what they're talking about, especially if it's a hard money lender. They really they look at these all day long. So if you're getting negative feedback from a hard money lender, you really probably should pay attention to what they're saying, because they're not willing to risk their money. So then maybe that's a red flag that the deal may not be as solid as you thought it was. Or at least there's some questions there that you need to answer, you know?
Okay.
Thanks. Joe, when
Yeah.
when would a bank ask for a breakdown like this? What kind of loan are we? Is this for a construction
So this is
loan?
this is a commercial construction loan. Yep. Or even like a FHA 203K loan. They have a similar type of document. They have like a specific document they want. But yeah, so they're gonna want this during your due diligence phase. So like during your financing period, they're gonna want this, and you're not gonna get your construction loan approved without them approving a budget list like this. Okay. But yeah, so some things. Well, one thing I wanted to mention. So some of these things are just by the number, and what I mean by that is like windows. Windows is an easy one to kind of do by the number, right? Every single property I buy, every property I look at, I count how many windows there are, and if there's 24 windows, and I know they're all wood and original windows, and they're 100 years old, which is a lot of the case in the buildings I buy, I know going in, I'm having to replace 24 windows during my rehab, right? So right now, the number I'm kind of working off of is like 400 to 500 for my cost. But if you're a customer, you're probably going to be more paying in the 500 to 700 range. That's going to be more of like a your cost with the markup. So that's easy to do, right? If they're standard windows, which means 101 united inches, which means corner to corner. If they're 101 united inches or less, that is one size for material and typically labor. If they're bigger than that, the cost goes way up. Like I had to put in like a triple mold, they call it, meaning they basically fixed together in the factory. A triple mold, basically three windows together, and that was like a $2,000 window. But those individual windows might have only been $600 if that wasn't the way it was built, if that makes sense. So there's some variables, but a general rule of thumb, $500-600 a window is a safe number. If you're doing a ton of them, like let's say you have to do 100, you're probably going to get a lot better price. You might get them down to $300 to $350, $400 a window. I mean, they're going to take a lot less margin on a really big deal. And if you're looking at like retail windows, like Champion or something, you're talking like 800 a window. Now, I wouldn't pay that high, but people do.
Yeah, I just got quoted $1,000 a window for something that looks like that right there.
Yeah.
Like 2 days ago.
Yeah. The actual window companies are outrageously expensive. So I would recommend trying to find a contractor or just a general construction, or even maybe a handyman who knows who's comfortable with windows, because they're not really that hard. I mean, it's literally like 4 screws. Once you get the window out, it's honestly the once you get the window in level and plumb, doing all the stuff to fix it on a replacement window, that's actually more work than the window. So fixing drywall, fixing trimming the outside of it, those things are actually more time consuming than the window itself. But anyway, I just wanted to give that example as to a way you can break down cost by the number. Doors are another one. Doors, I use like a rough number of like 300 a door on interior. So that's like a pre-hung 6-panel hollow core. Those are about $130, and then $150 on labor. So easy numbers, 300, right? And again, you're never going to be mad if you save money. So don't be afraid to overestimate things a little bit. So all that's to say, you get done with this whole sheet, right? And this is going to take you several hours to build out, especially if you don't really know what you're doing in your first couple times doing it. And then you come up with this number. I always add a contingency here as well. So there's a couple ways to do that. You either just say flat off the top, I'm adding 20% contingency for overruns, or you can go back and add or pad out each individual line with 20%. The reason why that might be a better deal is if you have equity room there, meaning you think you're going to have quite a bit of equity on the back end, like let's say you're doing a burr deal, you can pad these out a little bit where you're going to have access to more construction funding than you otherwise would, if that makes sense. So I've done that in the past too, where I'm like, okay, let's even use this deal as an example. my back end ARV on this, as we talked about last week, was 455, right? So I had a massively inflated appraisal that I didn't expect. I thought my best case was like 300 or 350. Well, I could have literally added $100,000 to this rehab number and it would have made sense with an as completed appraisal, even in the ballpark of that one. Why does that matter? Well, if you're able to get that construction funding and keep getting reimbursed on these draws and you can demonstrate it, then you're actually reducing your out-of-pocket costs significantly on the front end of a BRRRR. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? So if let's say you put 20% down on this deal when you closed, if you have a 20% overrun on your rehab budget, but you don't actually have to spend that 20%, you could theoretically be into this deal for almost no money on the front end, meaning not even after, not having to wait for your refi. So another little trick I've learned. Again, this is going to be easier said than done. It's going to be easier if you're GCing your own project because you have control of all this. But these are just little tips I've learned over the years. And the banks don't care as long as the appraisal gives them the loan to value that they're going to operate within. And as long as the funds that they're drawing on you are getting the work completed that you say is getting completed, that's why they do the inspection. So as long as those things are happening, the banks don't care, especially on the commercial side. FHA 203Ks might be more strict because that's conventional and that's all ran through the Fed. But I've never had a problem with the commercial banks and operating like this. Any questions about any of this before we move on?
Can I throw out a question? If you don't want to answer it, if it's getting too sideways off topic, that's fine. I was just curious because I don't keep tabs on any of the BRRRR stuff, but I was curious, Joe. I had heard on the podcast that they changed the seasoning period now to 12 months.
I did hear
and
that.
how that's going to impact the ability to BRRRR. And I was just curious your thoughts on that, having to hold longer term.
So that is my understanding of that was a guideline that came out through Fannie Mae. So Freddie Mac loans will still do a 6-month period.
Gotcha.
So I don't think it's going to be an overly complicated issue. I think that's just going to lean more people to going through Freddie Mac instead of Fannie Mae, in the situations in which that applies, right? And I just closed a 6-month seasoning cash out refi. So, they're still doing them, but that's why it's important to have a good lender that knows where to find the product that you need.
Is that typical in terms of lenders that you've used? That do you ever get pushback for we need a little longer than 6 months, we want to see, or is it just kind of like standard?
It is literally the underlay or the overlay on the underwriting is literally 6 months to the day from your recorded date.
Yeah, okay.
So Hamilton County is like typically 2 weeks behind your close to record. So if you close on the 14th, you're going to record on the 28th or whatever. So from that date, 6 months and 1 day, and then you can write the loan.
That's only with the federal ones, right? Like Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae is the seasoning. Like if you do a portfolio, then you wait. Would there ever be any circumstance that it would be more beneficial to go with Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae over if you can get a portfolio loan, or would that not make any sense?
Yeah, so I've done both. So let me add one other thing. So commercial lenders, in my experience, don't care about seasoning at all. They don't care. I've literally bought a property like this cash and a week later closed on a commercial loan. Like they don't care. And I've even I've done a couple wholesale deals where I'm buying from a wholesaler and they're like, hey, I need cash by the 7th. And my bank's like, hey, we're not going to be able to write this loan until the 12th. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I go ahead and close. And then I go ahead and close my construction loan, a week later or whatever. So commercial loans, I've never had any season issue of any kind. They don't care. But with residential conforming loans, Freddie, Fannie, and what's the other one for VA? Sally, or is that student loans? I don't know. I can't remember what Ginnie Mae. That's the VA loans. Those three secondary markets, they all have guidelines that are added in and above the federal guidelines, which are, we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but basically those are all outlined from all of the banking laws that were passed under the Obama administration after the last recession and the big real estate crash. They rewrote all the banking laws and mortgage laws. So those guidelines were all written by each one, and they're all a little bit different. So, but back to your question, a portfolio lender doesn't have to follow those guidelines. They can make their own. And my portfolio loans that I have don't follow those guidelines typically. So what I've also seen though is usually you're going to pay a little bit higher rate. So if you can get a conforming loan 30-year fixed, like on a 1 to 4 unit, typically that's going to be your best terms. It's like a conventional 30-year fixed. That's usually your best rate, your lowest PMI or no PMI, your lowest fees, your lowest closing cost. I've had a couple cases where banks had an appetite for loans. And so I got a really good deal. Like, I think I got like a refinance at 3% down, owner occupied, no PMI on a duplex. I mean, so like, and that was a portfolio loan at like, and that was like 3% or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so there's deals that come out that are like insane. And that's only because the bank's just trying to get more loans on their balance sheet. But you know, that you just kind of got to get lucky for that to happen. Outside of that, typically your standard conventional loans are going to be your best deal. All right, let's move on to the next section here. So this is more of the GC side. So I want to make sure that you guys kind of see the other side of how this goes, at least for my business. And obviously, every company does things a little bit differently. Raise your hand in here if you've done a rehab where you've subcontracted or hired a GC or hired a property or a project manager. If that's something you've done. Nobody? Okay. So I'm assuming as you guys continue scaling and buying more property, this is something that you're going to have to do. And this is my very rudimentary way I keep my own log of cost. So this is something I started doing about a year ago. And it's helped me gauge how we're tracking on projects as we go. So I literally update my labor hours and my material costs per project. I try to do it every week. Sometimes I get behind. It might be 2 or 3 weeks, but this here are my actual cost. So this is what I have paid out to my employees, my subs. These are what I paid out for material. And then this here is my margin on that project, right? So this was some of you probably seen it, but it was a condo that we did a couple months ago. Probably saw some of my pictures on Instagram or whatever, but it was like a 3-2 or a 2.5 actually, probably 1,500 square feet condo, 3 stories. And we basically pretty much redid the whole condo. Kitchen, bathrooms, flooring, paint, added a bunch of light fixtures, updated all the trim, all that stuff, a couple doors, whatever. But so this was the retail cost, and this was a retail project. This was not an investor. This was a typical, homeowner. So obviously you can kind of see how these mirror the breakdown on my budget sheet. So like, let's say this was my project that I bought and purchased myself as an investor. I would be doing this very similarly to show the breakdown of my actual cost in real time or as updated as I can. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how things operate. Here's some, idea of cost. So I had 734 in actual paint cost. We spent 2,000 on doors. We did like a sliding glass exterior door, so that was a big part of that cost. We also had a custom pantry door made like with the fog glass with like, it was like stenciled and etched, so that was a very expensive door. Appliances, and then some costs just based on some of the line items here of what we worked on. Any questions about this? Okay. And then here, this is a lot bigger budget. So this is the 28 unit. And this shows you a little bit more of like a complex deal that's, that's going to take a little bit of time when you get to deals like this. Okay. This one here, the bank actually asked me to put a contingency number in. So in and above our estimate. I had already put some contingency numbers in, but they actually wanted specifically one. But I'm here. I had to price out 28 kitchens, 28 sets of cabinets, 28 sets of square footage for flooring, for vinyl. So this project has an estimated 373 in material, 253 in labor. So if I were GCing this project, my typical margin is anywhere from 20 to 40%, depending on what I'm doing. So that's going to vary some. And also, like when I'm doing sub work, that usually has a lower margin because I'm not really babysitting, right? I'm literally bringing in my guy that works for us. I'm saying, here's our scope. They're giving me a material price. They're giving me a labor price. I'm going to the customer with one number. I said, hey, this is my cost and this is your cost, right? So it's a lot simpler. They're also paid by the task, not by the hour. So like, if they have to spend an extra 10 hours doing something, I don't really care. It doesn't affect me. So does that make sense? So for me, it's less risk. And I also don't have any overhead, right? I'm not paying for his gas. I'm not paying for insurance. I'm not paying for liability insurance. I'm not buying him tools. I'm not buying him equipment. Does that make sense? So like for me, I'm able to take a lot lower rate on a sub than I am on my employees. On my employees, if I don't make a 40% margin on our labor and material costs in-house, then I'm basically not going to have any profit because I have to cover all the overhead that's associated with that. Right. So this is what a bigger project looks like. This obviously takes a lot more time to break out when you have to now account for everything that can go wrong in 28 apartments. And you can extrapolate, right? Let's pretend this is a 100 unit. This is going to be a lot more involved, a lot more, a lot bigger numbers. Todd?
Are there any, in your experience, Joe, are there any areas where maybe not yourself, but other people have trouble or continually undershoot their estimate where it always ends up costing, 20, 25%, 30% more than budgeted?
You're saying like a general contractor? Or an investor?
An investor, just on any project, that there's typical areas where, I see this people always do, I don't know, I'm just throwing out hypotheticals here, parking lot repavement. People are always undershooting that by 20, 25%, the typical areas where you might see that are the Achilles heel of a budget, if you will, when maybe you've done it or you see other people.
I've certainly done it. My first few rehabs I did, like my first couple of burrs that were pretty large scale, I certainly underestimated everything, almost every line item the whole way up and down. I got better at it as time went on. And like what's weird is from like 2018, 2019, all the way up until COVID hit, I was actually doing really well. I was like nailing my budgets. My budgets, my I started doing obviously GC work, my customer budgets. And then COVID threw a wrench in all that because, like I'll never forget, I had a project starting in March of 2020 when the lockdown started that I had bid back in October, right? So it's like, my numbers were so far off. Actually, here's another prime example. I had budgeted out an entire lumber package, an entire material order for a garage that I was building at my the Madsen duplex, and priced it out in fall of 19. Well, we were so busy on other projects, we didn't actually break ground on that until like fall of 2020. And as you can probably imagine, I think my costs on that, let's just say my all-in cost was like 21,000 or something budgeted. for this big garage. I think it ended up being like 33,000. So I mean, it was almost like there was almost like a 50% increase in cost just because we had to wait a year to start that, and the price of lumber had gone so high.
Yeah.
So, there's like these black swan events you hear people talking about, and COVID was one of those, and nobody really anticipated it. And you can't account for that, right? I mean, there's things in business and in life that you cannot account for everything. Some things are going to go better than you thought. Some things are going to go worse. And that's why it's important to know your numbers, make sure you're buying good deals. Like, if a deal is so questionable that if any little thing goes wrong, it's going to derail it, then that should tell you what you need to know about doing it or not, and I think that helps us make confident decisions. But anyway, all that's to say that, yes, I've missed my budget many times. I've seen clients miss their budget many times. Wholesalers are always wrong. Like, so just don't even look at what a wholesaler says. I've never seen a wholesaler budget, be even remotely accurate. They literally, I think, just make up numbers as they go. And like, and so you see the way I do these, right? And it does take a little bit more time, but like, I've seen so many investors talk about, oh, well, I estimate this price per foot, and I say this much per foot if it's this level of rehab, or if it's this, and it's like, to me, that is like a completely unreliable way to try to price rehabs. Maybe that's like napkin math, if like just to determine you want to look at a deal or not, maybe, but like, if you're using that as your metric to make a decision to purchase and close, or go to a bank, and like, if you go to a bank and say, oh, I'm going to do, I'm estimating $25 a square foot in rehab, they're going to laugh at you. Like, they're never going to loan you money. So, it's a little bit more time intensive, but I think if you kind of work through it this way, it's going to give you a lot more accurate numbers. What other questions you guys have?
Is there anything you stumbled on your apartment complex that you haven't encountered before? Like, I know the Wi-Fi and stuff, but anything else that was unique because of the scale or size of that?
Yeah, I mean, the Wi-Fi is probably the most, unique situation. I finally, they're supposed to start installing that. It's been a process. It's going to end up being like $7,000 or $8,000 between the wiring, the cabling, and the actual units. But it's just been a nightmare process trying to get all the plans approved, and it's two different companies that have to work together. And anyway, it's a long story, but yeah, that's been a challenge. That's been a frustration, and it's very unique to that type of property, with it being a student housing. I think my biggest eye opener on this deal so far, though, is just how terrible the previous owners were. I mean, they did like no maintenance. I mean, I think I said this before, but we had probably 15,000 in deferred maintenance, like just little, like literally like $50 things for $15,000 worth. You know what I mean? So like, however many calls of service that is or whatever, but it's like, it's insane how poor the property was managed prior to me buying it. Now, I would have never got the deal I got without that being the case, and I wouldn't have scared off so many other buyers that I was competing against without that being the case. So it's, it's an opportunity, but it's just kind of mind-boggling that anyone could even own a property and be that terrible at it. So that was one, and then two, same thing with like the tenants. Like they literally put any tenant with a pulse. If you showed up with a pulse and $500 in your hand, like they gave you the apartment. Like, they didn't do backgrounds on any of these tenants. The vast majority of these tenants are completely unfit, to be approved for housing.
Was
So
that
that's,
owner managed, or did they actually have property management that they were paying for?
well, so they kind of had this uneducated on-site manager who didn't really know what he was doing. And he just didn't manage it well at all. Like I said, 75% of the tenants that I inherited, I would have never rented to under any circumstance.
Gotcha.
So just to give you an idea of how bad it is. And so we have constant drama, constant issues on site. We've moved out already about, 7 of the units, which is, that was 7 of the problem tenants. And again, we probably have another 14 or so that need to go, as soon as it's feasible. Almost just a large percentage of people don't pay on time, constantly late. It's just a, and here's what's crazy, right? So that's like, that makes up about a third of my portfolio. My other 50 units, I don't have any problems with. I mean, none. Nobody plays late. Nobody gets the cops called on them. I'm not getting called by other tenants about people fighting. I'm not getting called, I've had 2 windows smashed out by girlfriends or boyfriends of the tenant living there, like 2 in 6 months. So, I mean, again, that just shows you the clientele, right? And it's like 50 other units over 7 years. I've never had that happen anywhere else under any circumstance or anything even remotely like that. So, inherited tenants are one of the biggest problems in real estate that I've had. And, I think the more you scale, the more you'll run into that. But like, I have clients who are like, sometimes they're very concerned about like a vacancy. And I'm like, man, sometimes a vacancy is the best thing that can ever happen to you. Like, you get to start from scratch. You get to pick a tenant. Like, you don't, until you deal with some of this stuff, you don't understand how much of a blessing that can be. I know it's scary. You might have to miss a month or 2 of rent, but it can be a blessing. So yeah, I think those are the biggest, things I didn't anticipate. Like, I knew it was a rough clientele, but it's been significantly rougher than I anticipated.
Joe, can I add in on what you were just talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny because I was just having this conversation recently with some other people, but it seems like with this bigger pockets era, it's kind of ushering in a lot of good practices into the real estate world of, specifically management and how people take care of properties. And like you said, it's an opportunity with having so many, I guess there's like an older era of owners out there that you see that maybe it was a different era of time or whatever. I know the person that owned this, they were still considered a good landlord, but it was just deferred maintenance all day. And you drive around this area of where I'm investing, and you see a lot of those older landlords, basically pretty much anyone pre-bigger pockets. It's a whole different. It's almost like they had a whole different set of rules back then, and that's just something that I've noticed that's interesting. But as you said, that's also an opportunity for people that are new to investing or just people who are in the game that are trying to grow their portfolios. There are still a lot of that older generation that's still holding on to those properties, and sooner or later they're going to sell, and that's going to be an opportunity for people like us. So
yeah, and I think that is kind of a deeper question and thought, because it's like, there's obviously a lot of older landlords that are good people, and they're, and I think one thing that separates a younger generation, people in their 20s to 40s in landlording, is that you're going to have technology helping you, right? Like, I couldn't do half of what I do without technology. I have tech services, I have apps, I have systems, I have software, I have an assistant who operates within all those systems. Like, I could never do that by myself or without technology. Like, if I was doing all this by landline phone, I'd be screwed. So that helps, right? And that's something that the older generation never had, and it probably doesn't use. I think another like mom and pop landlords like that I bought property from, a lot of times they own like 2 or 3 buildings. They've owned them for 50 years, right? Maybe their dad or grandpa owned it and they inherited it. And it's like, yeah, they're a landlord, but it's like that takes up 2% of their mind space. For me, I talk, breathe, eat, sleep real estate 24/7. It takes up 70% of my mind space, right? So I think there's just different levels to it. And there's nothing wrong with being a mom and pop landlord where you own a couple of buildings and that's your thing. But I think it does create, you're never going to have that level of service that someone who is a professional investor, professional landlord can get. And there's a fine line, right? It's like, the smaller you are, the more directed service you have, right? Like, before I built it out enough to have employees, I was the one taking all my phone calls. I was taking all my texts. Tenants could get a hold of me 24/7 directly. Now they can't. Now I have that layer between us. So that creates a little bit of disconnect. And when you get to the really big scale, and you're Brandon Turner of the world and you have 8,000 units, I guarantee you none of Brandon Turner's tenants call him, right? Brandon Turner doesn't talk to any of his tenants and hitting them up. He can't. It's just not feasible. But the problem with that becomes, I'm not saying him, but anybody, where you have these layers in between and you have professional management companies in between, you are now making it where you're so disconnected for tenants that it's easy to be a slumlord because you're not affected by any of the day-to-day of that. Does that make sense? So like, I think there's different levels of this, and I'm not saying any way is necessarily good or bad, but I think it's important that the more you scale, you still want to keep that personal touch. And I think one thing that a lot of people confuse real estate with is, especially older landlords, is they look at what we do as a product, right? We are providing a product like housing. You pay me and I give you an apartment. That's not what we actually do. We are actually providing a service. So yes, housing in that property is part of that service, but the reason why somebody's paying us instead of paying their own mortgage, I mean, obviously there's a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons why is because they're paying us more than they should, because we are providing good customer service, we're providing good maintenance, we are keeping the amenities for them good, we're keeping our housing safe. We are supposed to be doing things above and beyond putting a roof over your head, right? And I think a lot of landlords disconnect from that reality. And I think that's also what, I try to look at myself as a good landlord by being proactive about these things. And again, I also want to give them the best product I can at a fair market rate, because if I don't charge my tenants enough, I cannot give them that product. And it's funny that, on this line of thought, so that we're getting into springtime. Springtime is when I do all of my annual rent increases. So all of my renewals and all of my month to month, almost all my tenants, 99% of the time, they're going to go up. Right. And this year's going to be no different. Now, there's a lot of variables that go into that, how much and why, but across the board, my rents go up. And I kind of look at this now that this is, obviously one of my main sources of income. I look at this and I say, okay, this is my raise. What is my raise going to be for this year? And we all know that inflation's still sticking around 6%. So that's kind of, my target in my head. Can I get 6% rent increases? And I think on a lot of our properties, I probably could. But part of my letter to my tenants in that is I express, hey, look, your rent's going up to this amount, and this is why. And I have to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And part of me spelling that out is taxes go up, insurance go up, which is true. But also, I could keep the rent the same, but now I'm going to be demotivated to provide a high level of service to them. Does that make sense? So it's like, obviously nobody wants to pay more money. We all know that. None of us want to pay more money. But I am doing myself a disservice and the tenant a disservice by not charging them the appropriate market rate to then allow me to provide an A+ service and product. Does that make sense? Hopefully I'm explaining that correctly. But that's the way I look at it. And I don't lose any sleep at night about, charging tenants a fair market rate, because I know I'm going to deliver a fair product for that price. And I think a lot of landlords charge them the highest they can and then also give them a shit product, so it's like, which is worse. Any other questions, comments on any of these topics we've discussed? Also, one little tip I want to add, now that I'm thinking about it. So another thing I've done the last couple of years that's worked out really, really well, and I may have mentioned this previously, but so I'm going to use this building as an example. I have a building in Mount Washington where my inherited tenants were at like 400 something a month in rent. Market rent on a updated unit is like $850. Okay, for these apartments. Given their condition, they're like probably 1990 remodels. They're clean, they're nice, but they're not, fancy or up to date. Their market rent on those are probably $650 to $750, somewhere in that range. So here's what I do. I go to my tenants and I say, hey, I understand you want to stay here. I want to keep you as a tenant. You've been here 12 years or whatever it is. The market rent on your apartment is $750. What is a number that you could comfortably afford if you wanted to stay in this apartment? And I let them come back to me with a number. And let's just say in that example, they're at $525. almost always the most I would charge is like 550, 575, like in a 1 year increase, something like that. That's a 10% increase. Let's say if I went to 575. And you would be shocked by how many tenants come back to me and they say, well, I can't do 750, but I could do 650, or I could do 675. And so now they've given me a number $100 higher than I was going to offer them, and they're choosing to do it. And I'm not the bad guy, because it's not my fault they're $300 under market rent. It's the previous owner's fault. The previous owner let them get $300 under market rent, and they did them a disservice by doing that. So does that make sense? And it's been a really tactful way to have a difficult conversation, but also retain good tenants without having to go in and, on those apartments, like I have to go in and put 10, 12 grand into each one, and then I move it up to 850, which is fine, but that saves me that 10 or 12 grand until they move out. Does that make sense? So yeah, definitely something I would suggest if you have, renewals or month-to-month tenants that you're increasing. All right, cool. If nothing else, let's transition into our group discussion, and I'm going to let Angelo go first. I know he has a burning question that him and I have talked about on his deal he's working on, so I'll let him discuss it with the group and let you guys give some feedback.
Yeah, so just a quick update, right? Completed the inspection about a week ago, just going through the process, right? And of course, I'm in that waiting period, and I'm just trying to anticipate everything that can go wrong, right? A matter of fact, that's what I do in my W-2, right? I come up with these worst case scenarios and how we can mitigate that risk of things going wrong, right? So Joe's been giving me a couple of therapy sessions that I appreciate. But just going through that process right now, and I don't know, maybe you guys can share some of those moments when you guys were buying your first properties, and some of the things that you were anticipating could go wrong, but really, did not go that way, or things that you were, I don't know, things that you did to put your mind at ease, I guess. It's just one of those things that I know that I'm overthinking it because I do that a lot, right? Um, but at the same time, I know that that's my comfort zone, right? Knowing everything that could go wrong, but I cannot really anticipate it. Like knowing what's behind the wall. So basically, here we found a little bit of like knob and tube, for example, right? And from what we can tell, should be a pretty straightforward fix. Um, but reality is that we don't really know what's behind the walls, right? It's just a matter of doing it, see what happens, and then take care of it, right? But I don't know. Those are some of the things that I've been dealing with. But anyways, Joe, what was I supposed to ask? I don't know. I'm just kind of all over the place. You're gonna have to remind me.
No, I think that's a good, you prompted it with what are some things that you guys were worried about in deals that either did or did not work out. If you guys have any feedback, or if you ever dealt with knob and tube. And I'm gonna refrain from this because him and I have already discussed it, but I want to hear what you guys your thoughts are.
I can chime in real quick. Haven't dealt with knob and tube, but Angela, I totally can relate. 5 years ago, I think it's 5 years ago, when we got ours, and you're just dreading, fingers crossed, nothing major. Scope the sewer line, please make sure that's okay, nothing major. And we didn't have anything huge pop up, but I did notice in the basement, some water staining, and come to realize, okay, it got a little bit of flooding because the drain, it's an 80-year-old duplex, and the drain's like this big in the outside of the garage, and there's all these trees in the back. Oh, it must have got covered up. and then came in and that happened. And so we ended up closing, and sure enough, I think like 2 weeks later we had a storm, and I'm waking up, I look outside, and there it is pooling. Even though I was trying to keep the leaves off, and I go downstairs, the water's over my ankles, and I'm flipping out, and then got it cleared, no issues. But long term, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't. I bought this place is going to flood every single time. Bringing plumbers in. What should we do? What can we change? And really, it was simple. I had to trim the trees back. I think it was like $1,000 to do that. Um, Changed out the grate plate, and plumber came in, and we were able to widen it. And really, it hasn't happened since. But at that moment, that first like, oh my gosh, and that just taught me. And we did have reserves, but really, as long as you got your reserves and you can cut that check, somebody can take care of it. And the same thing happened. Not that, but I'll give you a funny tenant story. But like 2 years in, I get a call on my cell phone at like 2 o'clock in the morning. It's my tenant upstairs, and she tells me there's a goddamn bat in her bedroom. And so I go up there, and sure enough, there it's flying around. I'm, scared as shit. And long story short, I'm up there for like literally 2 hours trying to get this bat to fly out. 4 o'clock in the morning, I just give up. I'm like, Kelly, I don't know what to do. We'll call an exterminator in the morning. So that was another thing. The exterminator got it. We sealed it up. We sealed up the where it was coming in, the bat chute. They did all that crap. I don't know if you guys have ever had bats, but I think it was like $2,000 later to get the bat out and all that, and it's taken care of. So temporary problem, but cut the check, long-term gain. It's the best decision my wife and I have ever made. You look at what Joe's done on his scale. You keep meeting all these people. It's like that short-term fear, you'll get over it. And as long as you have those reserves and you're not over leveraging, or you're out past your skis, to use your skiing analogy, Angelo, you'll be okay. That's just my 2 cents. So
I appreciate that. Yeah.
now I'm always that's what makes me sleep at night is I'm comfortable with my debt load, and I know our reserves are totally fine. Worst case scenario, like we've talked on here with Joe, whatever the biggest issue is, if it would happen, we have enough to handle it, and we can move on and recoup. So just my 2 cents, but that's awesome, man. I'll keep my fingers crossed for you, and excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo what Todd's saying. I mean, do what you can to mitigate the risk, and I mean, make sure your numbers are solid and everything, and roll with the punches. I mean, yeah, with the duplexes, I've had more. I had 3 inherited tenants, so that's been the drama in mine. I haven't had anything major, with the structures themselves. They're pretty solid, but just dealing with that stuff, when you look at it in the moment, it's the most stressful thing you've ever dealt with. But when you look back on it, it's in the grand scheme of things, they're profitable. You're able to keep your sanity past that issue and stuff like that. I mean, something's always going to come up. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's one of those things that I guess I got some free time now that Perfect North shut down, and it's just that waiting game, right? And then I go
oh
back and
yeah.
I start overthinking things and trying to anticipate things that are not wrong yet, right? And like I said, that's what I get paid for, right? Keeping things from blowing up, from catching on fire, stuff like that. And that's one of my skills that's not helping me a whole lot right now. But no,
Honestly, it
I
is. You
appreciate
just
that.
don't know it yet. It's going to
Yeah.
benefit you in the long run. So
Yeah.
It's funny in this situation, hearing you guys tell your stories. I told Angela this, and this is the truth. So I've been through hundreds of these properties like this, you know, over the years. And it's like, this property he's buying is one of the cleanest properties I've ever seen. I mean, this thing is like immaculate. So it's a nunnery, like the nuns live there. One side still has a current tenant nun who he would be inheriting, and then the other side's vacant where him and his fiance are going to move. This thing is like, I mean, it's spotless. Like, I mean, you could eat off the floor right now, you know. And obviously, I saw a lot of investment property. It's not normally like that. And I think what's funny in this deal is that this is literally the only legitimate issue on the inspection report, and I think that's causing him to hyper focus. Like, let's say there was 10 things wrong, I don't even think he would care about this. But because this is the only thing wrong, it's got all of his attention. And it's kind of funny looking at it, you know, zoomed out. That I think that's you know, because you're like, Todd's talking about the water problems. Like, this basement is like airtight. Like, we've been there on 2 different rainy, stormy days, no water, bone dry, all like totally painted, like epoxy floor. I mean, beautiful. Like, you could live in the basement. I mean, it's that nice. And this is like a older building. High ceilings, everything, and it's bone dry, like no water problems. So it's just interesting how, like, you know, it's like you get a big fat pimple right in the middle of your face, and everything else is crystal white. That one pimple is going to stick out like a sore thumb, just like this wire is. So, anyway, Angel, any other updates you wanna give?
No, we just gotta get it to the finish line, and we'll keep you guys updated.
Awesome.
Yeah, please do. That's great, man.
Yeah. Congrats again, man.
Thanks. Thank you.
That's exciting.
All right, Todd.
Well, finally finished my classes, thank God. And my paperwork's en route to the state tomorrow. So
Nice.
fingers crossed, and just more studying. We'll see when I take the test and hopefully pass the first time. That's about it.
Congrats.
Thank you.
All right, Gage.
Yeah. So I think last time I talked about it, I was still debating on if I was gonna get carpet or LVP. I did LVP, as you can see. So looks a lot nicer in here. It feels a lot nicer to be living in this place with this. I went ahead and got that soundproof layer as well underneath, and so far so good. I actually think it was better than the carpet because I really can't hear the tenants downstairs at all anymore, even though there is more of an echo up here. I think that really took care of it. So I definitely recommend getting that if that's something anybody's ever thought about doing. My cash out closed, I think today. I think the money hit today. So I've got that. I put an offer in on a single family house in Dayton, Kentucky. It was a foreclosure. And they gave me, since it was a foreclosure and it's through the banks, they gave me a verbal acceptance. Whereas they said they're not entertaining any other offers and that they'll be sending over the filled out paperwork. So I'm just waiting on that right now. Gonna see how that is with that. Joe, you and I talked about it, but there's some strings attached that they didn't tell me about until they sent over the contract. Basically a seasoning period of a year. But as long as I'm able to do the updates and refi on it, I think that this might become like my home base for Cincinnati for a while because I like the location a lot. So hoping that inspection, everything goes good on it. So that way I can get into it and start working on it. Other than that, I have a room here in this house that's got bad, some cracks in the plaster. I've had a guy come and do a quote on Glidwall. Is anybody familiar with Glidwall? Anybody have any thoughts? You have any thoughts, Joe, on Glidwall? Would you recommend doing that for some cracks in the plaster? Or
Yeah, so it's basically a mesh, like fiber paper that acts as a backer to new plaster being put on top of old plaster, and it basically just strengthens it. And the guy that I had do it at my first property ever, he was like a master with it. I mean, he literally made that plaster as smooth as glass. So that's the only experience I had with it. But I think if it's somebody who's good with it, yeah, I mean, they can make it look like brand new plaster. And plaster is much finer, smoother finish than drywall.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and it sounds like it might be cheaper than throwing up a bunch of drywall.
Yeah,
So
then it would be way cheaper than tearing off and replacing. Now that grid wall itself comes in rolls, and those rolls, this is like 7 years ago. The rolls of that were like $500. So I don't even. I mean, it's basically almost like a paper towel is what it looks like. It's like a
yeah.
see-through mesh. But
Mhm.
I don't know how much. I bet it costs a lot more now. Is what I'm getting at.
So do you cover the entire wall with that?
Usually like rough spots. So like if there's like divots, imperfections, heavy cracking, basically allows you though to, as long as it's not like literally moving with your hand, it
Yeah.
allows you to keep the existing plaster in place, and it creates a barrier to allow new plaster to be applied. And that's my understanding of it. But it's basically like a repair. But I mean like in my building, he did like all the ceilings in it because all the ceilings were really rough. And he made it look like, I mean, it was as smooth as butter. So
Cool. Other than that, that's it. Oh, I signed up for the Flying Pig half marathon, so I
nice.
don't know if Colby's in here or not, but if he's in here, we'll
I
be
don't think
running it.
so. Nice.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, Kevin.
How's it going, guys? Everything's pretty much the same with me. Unfortunately, fortunately, same as you, Todd. I finished all my classes, took all of the final exams so that you can take the exam for the state. And so at this point, I just probably want to brush up on studying, maybe a couple days, and try and get that test scheduled next week. Pretty much got like a sponsoring broker, know who I'm going to go with, and same as you, just like I don't want to take the test more than once. I don't think I'll have to, but definitely brush up on the principles and practices in law. They said appraisal and finance, there's probably like 7 questions per book out of 120 on there. So I don't really think 14 questions possible are really going to make or break anything. Other than that, that's really it. Game plan, like you said, Joe. It's March, it's spring, things are going to start to heat up here in Columbus. I'm just looking to hit the ground running as an agent and roll those commissions right into investments. So I'm still in the fire department, still working that. So every third day, I got to stop what I'm doing business wise and be there for 24 hours, which isn't bad. But that's the game plan for now. So really going to just be heavily focused on operating as a really good agent. So that's my primary focus right now.
What broker did you go with?
I'm going to be going with Red One here in Columbus.
Okay.
I think the guy started it like 4 or 5 years ago, and in that time they've grown a lot. I wouldn't say they're the biggest brokerage in Columbus, but they're probably at over 700 agents right now.
Okay.
So it's pretty good. And not only that, the team, it's more so like a team on the brokerage that I'm thinking about going with. They're very investor focused. I think the team leader is a traditional agent, and one of his partners is pretty much essentially a career flipper. So I think, having an investing background and wanting to become an agent primarily only for my own investments, I'm like, well, let me just go there, learn from these dudes for the rest of the year, see what's going on, and pretty much just try and gain that experience. So it was more so the team of why I even picked that brokerage.
So one tip I'll give you and Todd. I know Todd. I don't know how much he's focused on actually building out a sales business, but I'll tell you both the same thing. One thing that I was told when I was finishing up my classes, getting ready for my test, that helped me a lot, and your brokers may already have told you this, or they will be telling you this when you start your training. Go ahead and start working on a spreadsheet of 200 people that we call it in the business sphere of influence. You probably heard that term. 200 people that like you, know you, that would have a conversation with you. So, high school friends, college, whatever, people, coworkers, family, extended family, all that. 200 people, put them on a spreadsheet, get their name, their phone number, their email, their address, and start having conversations with these people.
Gotcha.
And it's like, it can be something very casual and simple. And you just say, hey man, it's Kevin, just want to catch up with you. Haven't talked to you in a while. How's your family? Whatever, natural conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to hit them with like a hard sales pitch. Don't make it, you don't want to sound like a telemarketer, but catch up, kind of rekindle that relationship. And then at the end, you just drop a little soft hit. Hey, just letting you know, man, I'm getting my real estate license. If you know anybody looking to buy or sell real estate, think of me or hit me up or whatever, right? Just
Gotcha.
something real soft like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that starts that conversation now and put it in their mind that you're in real estate business. And you'd be surprised by how many people and how many potential clients you can build off that list. Now, obviously, right now it's not a great time. Rates are volatile. And people don't really want to sell. People don't really want to buy. It's kind of a slow time. But that'll help start and you lay that groundwork to build out your business. And, especially being in the fire industry and things like that, I know you probably know a lot of firemen and can get connected with a lot of different people. So I would definitely, you might as well start working on that right now while you're studying for your test.
Okay. I appreciate it. I definitely will. How are things for you down in Cincinnati right now? Are you still pretty busy as a retail agent?
Yeah, it's pretty slow right now. I mean, I got a handful of active clients that are looking for deals, and I'm working with a lot of investors right now. The retail market's pretty slow. There's not a lot of people wanting to sell, not a lot of people wanting to buy on the retail side. And so I think until rates kind of stabilize, it's going to be tough. I think a lot of people just don't know what to do. So they're kind of frozen. They're kind of frozen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's way slower than even last year was so far.
Yep.
All right, DJ.
All right. No real updates from the business side. Still learning and trying to find those elusive properties and just doing more research on mixed use. Just looking at that property in Norwood kind of got me interested in that kind of model anyways. So doing some more research into that.
Have you checked LoopNet yet?
I have. I was on it. I was on it the whole ride home. But
Yeah, a little bit better than realtor.com, that's for sure.
Yeah, a little bit different.
Whatever. So I know you said you had a backup offer on that building. Did you ever hear anything back on that?
No, they had. We pulled the backup offer after everything. I think it went. The offer that they accepted, they were working through financing. The last thing that Zach was saying. So
okay.
That'll be interesting to see. We're watching it still, but.
So if you're interested in something like that, I'm going to be listing soon 2 side-by-side mixed units in Norwood and on Brighton Montgomery Road. So yeah, we'll need to talk in the next day or two, and I'll send you that info before it goes live if you
Cool.
want
That's
to
awesome.
if you want to take a look at it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, they're both four apartments upstairs, commercial space downstairs, and they're side by side. So basically, it'd be 10 units. If you want to buy both. Cool. Yeah. So for me, oh, sorry. Was there anything else? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, nope. I finished a couple books, started a couple more, and that's it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So for me, as you can tell, I'm dealing with some sort of cold or flu or whatever going on. It's been kicking my butt past few days, but hopefully I'm on over the hill on that. 28 units are progressing. We got 2 apartments that we're wrapping up. Got 2 more going vacant that we're starting to work on. So everything's moving forward on that. Finishing up a couple retail rehabs. Just regular like retail customers. And we'll be starting a big addition project here in the next few weeks, waiting on the concrete sub to pour that footer and prep, and then we'll be ready to start working on it. But yeah, I mean, nothing else. I'm still working on the cold texting. I got about 10 kind of warm leads I'm working on. Mainly it's sellers who are open to selling but not motivated to sell, so they're kind of wanting like a retail price for a property. So it's just, I may look at trying to talk them into listing with me as an agent, but it's not really something I would buy, not at the prices they want. So like I said, I'm going to dedicate 3 months to doing it. I'm really only in like my 3rd week. I have about 1,000 numbers pulled that I'm ready to send. I just haven't part of it, if anyone ever wants to get into it, it's like you have to time block not only the time to send the messages, which takes time, curating a list and making it and then putting it in the system and all that, but then also you have to have time to respond. So you can't just send out 1,000 texts, because then you're going to get, 200 messages that you're not going to answer, and it was totally a waste of time. And then you're ignoring people, and you're going to piss them off if they actually do want to talk to you in the first place, which most don't, right? So it's kind of there's a little bit of a system here that I haven't quite figured out, but it's something I'm trying to work into my regular weekly routine, and just kind of make it like a 30 minutes here, 30 minutes here scheduled time, where I'm time blocking to dedicate to cold texting and responding. Because like right now, like I said, I got like 10 leads that I haven't even had time to work through. They could be good. They could end up being a great deal, but I haven't even had the time to work through, send, receive, respond, plus underwrite, right? Like it adds a lot of dynamics to what obviously I'm already doing a ton of stuff, as everyone knows. So, but anyway, it's interesting. I'm going to keep on it, and hopefully it'll generate some business or investments. Yeah, I think that's it. Any other comments or questions, Gage?
I do have another question, but this might be its own topic or semi-topic for another call. But Google search just hasn't been any help for me on this type of stuff, bigger pockets, because every opinion is different on it. But what I'm curious about is, say you own a duplex or a rental in a B neighborhood, and a new development springs up within, a mile or two away. Say it's 100 units, all A class, all, super nice and marketable. What does that do? Does it hurt your ability to rent out your place? Does it help? Does it bring your property value down? Does it bring it up? There's just a lot of variables there that I'm curious about learning more about, because there's just a ton of developments, it seems like, going up. So being leery of that and understanding what that means, I think, is something at least that I would like to learn about. So
yeah, so the best example I can give is Silverton. So I used to be a cop there. I was looking there heavily for properties, and they put in that I don't remember, I think it's called A56 or something like that development, right at Stewart Road in Montgomery, right before you get into Kenwood. And I was terrified that if I bought like a fourplex here, and let's say one bedroom rent at the time was $600 or $650. I mean, this was 5 years ago or whatever. That would somehow negatively impact mine, because now there's all this influx of inventory. Here's what I learned through that process: every single new construction development is A class. They're not building, and they can't afford to build anything other than A class, because it doesn't make any money. So you're actually not even having comps to existing inventory. So like a 600 square foot, one bed, one bath, 4 family, let's say in Silverton, which is a very prevalent, common, inventory there, that was built in 1940, 1950. I don't care how nice you make that, it's never going to be a comp to the 900 square foot, one and a half, that's $1,400 a month in this A56 development. So I've learned that it actually has like no impact. And it's also like you're not going to have your clientele who lives in that 4 family is not the same tenant who's going to live in that. The people who live in A56 are lawyers, accountants, CPAs. They work downtown, they work on the banks, they drive a BMW. They don't want to buy a house, they don't want to buy a condo yet, but they're like maybe 1 or 2 years out of college. They want quick access to downtown, they want to be central, but they don't want to live like an OTR. Like that's who's living there, or maybe like a single professional who's not married, right? And they want a smaller apartment, because I think there's only 1 and 2 beds over there. So that's what I've seen firsthand. It didn't have any impact on the comps. I think it actually helped drive rents up a little bit, because now if your ceiling's 1,400 for Class A, your ceiling for Class B might be 800, or I'm sorry, like Class C might be like 800. But hopefully that helps your question. I don't see them being comparable in almost any case, because it's such a different product.
Hey Joe, can I chime in real quick?
Sure.
And curious on your opinion, and I know I don't want to go too deep on this because of our time, but if you were heading from 856, if you were heading south on Montgomery, it seemed like there was like after those were built, there was like a trickle down effect in terms of, because there's that complex on the right. I think they went in and rehab those, maybe with finishes or whatever, because I know that I remember seeing ads for that. And then further down, more towards the heart there, Silverton, I know there was one complex, they totally gutted it. Now, obviously, it's the same thing. I think, like Gage, like Joe was saying, it's not going to be A class, but it's maybe seem to maybe elevate slightly, the finishes of those, and kind of where they were C or C minus, now they're like, B or B minus. I don't know. Just seemed like that followed a couple years after, kind of elevated a little bit. I don't know, from what I've seen.
Did it after those were built, did any industry, specifically like retail, like trendy retail, go into that area, Joe, that you can think of? Like, was there more coffee shops popping up because those people were there? Did it have an effect on that?
I don't know about that specifically, but like there were vacancies in Silverton that looked to seem to all be infilled. So like a lot of that main drag through like Main Street, Silverton, Montgomery Road, and Plainfield. Like when I was a cop there, now you're talking like almost 10 years ago. From there until now, there's been a huge influx. I mean, obviously the entire market's picked up. It wasn't just that development, but there was multiple vacancies 10 years ago that are not vacant anymore. So I think it just helped. I think it helped. Like I said, when you drag your ceiling up, that's going to help pull your floor up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so like here's another example I'll give real quick. I live out in Milford, Miami Township on the east side. Red whatever, and you've seen the little developments all over the place. This one's called like Redwood, Miami Township or whatever is a development, but they got one in Oakley. They got them all over the place. They are a buy and hold ground up developer. So they built townhouses out here in Miami Township, right, very close to my house, where like a 2-bed, 2.5 bath townhouse is like $2,200 a month in rent. Okay. So what did that do? So what that did in our market is, if you got a 3-2 little brick and mortar, square, basic bones, nothing fancy ranch with like a 1-car garage, well, all of a sudden now your floor is $2,200 for a 2-2. Your 3-2 with a garage, all of a sudden on a crappy little house, I'm calling it crappy, but cookie cutter, basic 1940s, 1950s ranch, 1,200 square feet. Now all of a sudden that's $2,600 a month, right? Where prior to that, that would have been like $1,800. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it moved that price per foot from like $1.50 to now, like, there's houses I see in Miami Township going for $2 a square foot. And that would have never happened prior to that development. So that development is the opposite. You're in like a Class B neighborhood where it made your floor here and brought your ceiling up on the existing inventory. And in Silverton, like a Class C neighborhood, let's say, you got your floor here and your ceiling dragged your floor up. So, but here's the thing. They're not comps. Your tenants who want that aren't going to go to that. You know what I mean? It's not, you're talking about different clientele. So I think that's the takeaway, is that they're not comparable, but they can have corollary effects.
Gotcha.
All right, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up here. I will see you guys on the 22nd. I am working on getting a couple interviews scheduled, so that'll be the plan for the 22nd. I'll post that as soon as I have it. Any other comments, questions, or feedback before we close up?
Just thanks for the numbers and stuff on the spreadsheets. That's great.
Yeah, and if anyone wants that template, let me know. I can send you or I'll just, when I post this video, I'll post a link. I'll make a template, a Google Doc. You can just copy and paste. And like I said, I think Park National gave me that template, so feel free to use it however you would like.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. All right. See you guys in 2 weeks.
Thanks. See you guys.
See you guys. Yep.